The purpose of this project is to become more culturally aware and to gain an understanding of how culture impacts learning and language acquisition. This will be accomplished through research and through an in-home interview with an immigrant family. I will then make recommendations for how educators and schools can be more culturally responsive. This project serves as a requirement for completion of EDU587, Communicating with Immigrants at Georgetown College. The family that has agreed to participate in this project is a family that recently immigrated from Afghanistan. In order to understand the culture of the Afghan people, it is imperative to understand the geography, history, and religion of the country. Afghanistan is located in Central Asia and is bordered by Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, China, Iran, and Pakistan. This centralized location has made Afghanistan a coveted and frequently traveled land throughout history. The terrain of Afghanistan, which has hot summers and cold winters, is predominantly covered by the rugged Hindu Kush mountain range. Although many people picture arid deserts when picturing Afghanistan, there are actually 4 main regions of the country, each with diverse climates and geographic characteristics. Afghanistan's northern plains region has grassy foothills and plains, large amounts of mineral and gas deposits, and many nomads grazing sheep in this fertile region. The Central Highlands region covers 2/3 of the country and contains the Hindu Kush Mountains. The Highlands Eastern Slopes region is an important agricultural area. This region has monsoonal air that moves up from Pakistan in the late summers and gets trapped by the Hindu Kush Mountains, often creating floods, mudslides, and damaging crops. The Southern Plateau region is extremely hot and arid with few rivers. An important part of Afghanistan's history is the role Great Britain played throughout the 19th and early 20th century in what is known as the Great Game. Because of its location as a crossroads in Central Asia, Afghanistan has a long and violent history of imperialism, war, and exploitation. When Great Britain held imperialistic possession of India in the 19th century, and Russia struggled for an Indian port, Afghanistan was caught in the middle in what is known as the Great Game. Though not a game at all to the Afghan people, this power struggle resulted in 3 British wars against the Afghan Pashtun people. Although the people of Afghanistan technically won the wars, they lost many Pashtun tribal territories to what is now known as Pakistan. Britain held control until Afghanistan's independence in 1919. During the Cold War, Afghan communists staged a military coup and overthrew the government with the support of the Soviet Union, although devout Muslims were opposed to this coup. This resulted in the Soviet-Afghan War in 1979, which killed 1.5 million people and displaced more than 6 million refugees into neighboring countries such as Pakistan and Iran. The Soviet Union eventually relinquished control at the end of the Cold War. This power vacuum resulted in local factions fighting for control of the country. The Taliban, which is Pashto for students, rose to power and gained control of 90% of the country by the year 2000. After the Taliban attacked the United States in New York City on September 11, 2001, the United States military joined forces with Afghan militias that opposed the Taliban in a deadly war to take back control of the country and to dispose of the Taliban. This controversial war has technically ended, but the country still has a long road ahead of it in order to overcome the devastation left behind from the brutality of the Taliban and the war. In 2004, Afghanistan adopted a new constitution, became a republic with 3 branches of government, and elected a new president. In Afghanistan, 99% of the population is Muslim, with 15% of Afghan Muslims being part of the Shia branch, while 85% of Afghan Muslims belonging to the Sunni branch of Islam. The cornerstone of Islam is the Quran, which contains the will of Allah, passed down to the Prophet Muhammad, and the Quran is the center of all Muslim faith. As part of Islamic culture, every adult Muslim must uphold certain obligations known as the 5 pillars of Islam. The first pillar of Islam is believing and is an affirmation of faith that qualifies a person as a Muslim. The second pillar of Islam is prayer. Muslims must pray 5 times a day and follow specific guidelines during prayer time. Muslims are encouraged to pray together in mosques whenever possible. The third pillar of Islam is charity, or giving to the less fortunate. The fourth pillar of Islam requires fasting from sunrise to sunset during the holy month of Ramadan. The fifth pillar of Islam is making a pilgrimage to the holy site of Mecca if one has the financial means and the health to do so. Mosques serve an important role in Afghanistan. There is usually at least one mosque in every Afghan village. In addition to places of prayer and spiritual guidance, mosques often serve as local meeting houses, traditional Islamic education centers for young boys, and occasionally guest houses for visitors. Friday is the holy day of the week in the Muslim faith, comparable to Sunday in the Christian faith, so it is common for Muslims to attend religious services and prayer time in mosques on Fridays. Gender roles in Afghanistan have been formed by Islamic law, patriarchal family traditions, and cultural values. In following traditional patriarchal families, men in Afghanistan are the head of household. A wife and children belong to the husband and his family upon marriage and childbirth. Men are considered the providers, disciplinarians, communicators, and decision-makers, and find pride and respect in carrying out these roles. There are traditional high expectations of women in the family unit. They are expected to marry young, have many children, and should not work outside the home. Women must care for the children and home and are responsible for all cooking and cleaning. Although a woman is highly respected because of her reputation and mothering abilities in Islamic culture, some aspects appear to be contradictory of the value of gender equity. For example, females generally always defer to males in decision-making. Older females give in to their younger male family members. Also, boys are almost always better educated than girls in Afghanistan. Under the reign of the Taliban, many schools were closed, and girls were often not permitted to attend school at all. The Taliban also enforced the law that women must be covered by burqas at all times. Cultural taboos to be aware of include avoiding pointing the bottoms of one's feet at people, avoiding using the left hand to eat with or greet people, not using the thumbs up or okay signs, not consuming alcohol or pork, and not using profanity. Being one of the poorest countries in the world, Afghanistan has a colorful history and an ongoing turbulent political climate. Citizens of this country face insurmountable challenges. The life expectancy in Afghanistan is 47 for men and 46 for women, with nearly half of the population being under the age of 15. In comparison, the population of the United States is much more equally distributed across age ranges. Having such a young population living in a volatile place has been catastrophic. 1 in 4 children die before the age of 5. Many children suffer from severe injuries. There is also a high number of orphans living in the country. Since the 1970s, there has been an influx of refugees fleeing from and later returning to the country, depending on the political climate at the time. However, at one point in the 1980s, nearly 1/3 of the population of Afghanistan, or 6 million people, were refugees. This refugee crisis is the result of much of the country having been devastated under the rule of the Taliban and through various wars. The education system of Afghanistan is extremely fragile. It is estimated that less than 25% of children are enrolled in school. Literacy rates are some of the lowest in the world in Afghanistan. According to the UN Education, Security, and Cultural Organization, current estimates indicate that only 31% of the population is literate. There is also a discrepancy between genders. The male literacy rate is 45% and the female literacy rate is only 17%, with some rural areas being as low as 1% for females. Although the education system has made tremendous progress since the fall of the Taliban, there are still enormous obstacles to overcome. Many children still live too far to safely walk to school. Schools are also frequently lacking in resources such as supplies, textbooks, and even teachers. Also, according to UNICEF, in Afghanistan, although there are about 14,000 schools, only 15% are for girls, and 50% are without usable buildings, safe water, and sanitation facilities. It is evident that there are not many educational opportunities in this war-stricken, impoverished nation, especially for young girls. To better understand Afghan culture, I conducted a home visit with the Mahmud family, who immigrated from the Kandahar province in January 2017. The father, who I will call Omar, worked as a security officer for the U.S. Army and served as an interpreter because he speaks Urdu, Dari, Pashto, and English. Although Omar had military connections, he had to overcome many bureaucratic hurdles to obtain visas for his family. It was not until October 2016 when his 4-year-old son fell off of a 2-story building and required numerous surgeries and was in a coma for 2 weeks that the family finally received confirmation after 4 years that their immigration status was approved. Throughout our entire visit, Omar kept bringing our conversation back to education. When asked to describe his dreams for the future of his children, the cultural values, and the values of his family, he said, "Just education. They cannot do anything without education. They have to find the right way. Education will help my children find the right way." It is evident that Omar values his family and their future based on how much he cares about them and wants them to be successful. When asked to describe the biggest achievement or most important thing he has done in his life, Omar said, "Having my family and being able to support my family." Omar also described schools in Afghanistan during our visit. He said that although there are schools, the salaries of teachers cannot always be paid, and sometimes teachers take salaries but do not teach. None of their children had ever attended school prior to immigrating to the United States because the schools in Afghanistan was too far and it was dangerous to attend. He explained that the Taliban and other organized crime groups often kidnap children and hold them for ransom, and that there is often fighting between NATO forces and the Taliban. The family could not risk sending their daughter to school under these conditions. I also asked Omar what it was like to go from a predominantly Muslim country to a place with very few Muslims, and if the family had experienced any hardships or troubles based on their religion. He said that no one asks him about his religion and that he never wonders about anyone else's religion. He said, "If I need help, people and neighbors have been kind and helped me, and that if others need help, I will help them too." He was very adamant that religion does not matter in order to be kind to people. Throughout the entire interview, the family was extremely hospitable. Omar instructed us not to take off our shoes when we arrived and showed us where to sit. We were served bottled water, tea, and assorted snacks, and were even offered a ride back to school since we had walked to the family's home. Overall, the family was very appreciative of our visit and being able to ask questions about U.S. schools and culture. Based on the analysis of the research and home visit with the Mahmud family, there are several implications for schools in the United States. Educators must get to know their students and be intentionally aware of cultural differences, especially social etiquette and cultural taboos. If students feel that their heritage is not validated or they are insecure in their environments, then they are less likely to be successful academically. In addition, immigrants and refugees come from diverse backgrounds, which are often plagued by political, racial, and socioeconomic problems, which contribute to part of their identities. Teachers must get to know the individual backgrounds and experiences of their students in order to be sensitive to these hardships and in order to facilitate learning. Another implication for working with immigrant families is that teachers must understand bilingualism. Students and their family members may speak more than one language prior to learning English, or English may be their second language. Teachers should be familiar with what these languages are and be aware of similarities and differences between the phonetic, syntactic, and semantic systems of these native languages and how they relate to English. There are differences in the proficiency levels attained in a language in the domains of listening, speaking, reading, writing, and technical vocabulary, so it is understandable that people will have varying degrees of comfort in each domain. Other factors to consider regarding bilingualism include the age of acquisition of the languages, if the languages were acquired simultaneously or successively, and the purpose for acquiring the languages. Teachers must not make assumptions about what language an immigrant speaks, reads, or writes, or make assumptions about their intelligence based on their ability or inability to translate for someone else. A final implication for educators in the United States is to consider how they will approach teaching reading and writing to English language learners. Reading is probably the most difficult task we ask the young brain to undertake, according to David Sousa in How the ELL Brain Learns, because reading is not an innate ability like speaking is. Children learn to read by acquiring vocabulary by listening to others and then practicing pronouncing and using this vocabulary with feedback and responses from other people. The ability to read depends on the words learned during this time and being aware of sound differences in spoken language in order to make these important phoneme-grapheme connections. For English language learners, oral language is a prerequisite for literacy skills. Therefore, teachers of ELL students must prioritize and focus on vocabulary development, oral language skills, and phonological awareness in order to prepare students for reading. According to Sousa, formal reading instruction should be postponed until the child can speak English with an adequate level of proficiency. It is the responsibility of teachers, who are facing diverse populations like never before, to understand culture and cultural diversity, to strive for equity in schooling, and to promote achievement for all students. Because immigrant and refugee students and families are acculturating and acquiring a new language simultaneously, we must ensure that they feel secure and have a culturally responsive school environment. To do this, teachers must embrace culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive teaching involves understanding the history and culture of students, having high expectations for all students, fostering positive family relationships, and having a culture of community in the classroom. In order to help students with their English language development, hold students to high academic expectations, and demonstrate the value that parents' cultural backgrounds play in education, schools can follow these recommendations to engage in culturally responsive teaching. 1. Understand and utilize families' cultures, languages, and lives as assets in the classroom. 2. Use sheltered instruction to facilitate language acquisition. 3. Engage in student-centered instruction with the teacher serving in the role of the facilitator. In conclusion, in order to be able to engage in culturally responsive instruction, which is truly best practice for all students, especially ELL students, schools and educators in the United States must get to know the cultural, linguistic, and personal backgrounds of their students' families. Schools that build strong relationships with families demonstrate to students that they value their heritage and well-being. Teachers that engage in culturally responsive teaching methods, such as having high expectations, seeing parents as positive assets in the school culture, and focusing on engaging student-centered learning, will ensure that their immigrant students and other ELL students feel supported in their educational experience. For more information on Afghanistan, bilingualism, or culturally responsive teaching, visit the resources found at the end of this video.